When a door can save strangers, but endanger everyone around it, who has the right to keep it open? On Harbor 9, one human technician faces that question before he even knows the full cost. Thank you for listening and supporting the channel. Subscribe for more sci-fi stories, and come hear what happens next. Rhys Calder had one hand buried inside a gravity stabilizer when the floor decided it was tired of being a floor. The deck under his boots tilted 3 degrees, then snapped back with a thump that made the whole service tunnel ring like a struck bell. A string of cheap sleeping lanterns swung from the ceiling beyond the open hatch. Down an outer ring, people had learned to hang everything from pipes and cables because there was never enough room on the floor. Rhys tightened his grip on the stabilizer housing and looked at the shivering needle on his hand gauge. "That better be you coughing," he said to the machine. The stabilizer answered by spitting a line of blue sparks across his glove. Rude but honest. Davenholt's voice crackled through the suit bead in Rhys's ear. "Tell me that was you testing something." "Sure," Rhys said. "I tested whether the deck wants to throw everybody into the ceiling. Results are mixed." "Rhys, I know." A deeper vibration rolled through the tunnel. Not from the local stabilizer. Not from the dock arms. This was older, heavier, a low twist in the metal that came up through the bones of Harbor 9. Rhys pulled his hand out of the open panel and looked past the hatch into the crowded corridor of outer ring. A woman carrying a stack of filter cloths braced against the wall. 2 tired mechanics grabbed a floating crate before it hit an air pipe. Someone cursed in a language Rhys did not know, and someone else laughed too loudly, the way people laughed when they were scared but did not want the neighbors to hear it. Then the emergency lamps shifted from yellow to red. Gate 7 had woken up. Rhys froze for half a second. The old forbidden gate sat deep in the station core behind 3 layers of locks, 6 layers of warning paint, and enough bad history to make every technician on Harbor 9 speak softer when passing its sealed corridor. It was not connected to any active schedule. It had no approved transit window. It should not have had enough live power to warm a cup of coffee. Gate 7 had a reputation even among people who had never seen it. The older station workers called it a hungry door, not because they believed in ghosts, but because its old transit design borrowed stability from whatever sat around it. Modern gates carry their own buffering rings and bled shock into empty space. Gate 7 had been built in a cheaper decade, when engineers trusted mass, luck, and long warning labels more than mercy. Rhys had studied its old diagrams because somebody had to. He knew the gate did not simply use power. It leaned on the station's shield, tugged at anchor spines, and let gravity take the first bruise when the numbers went bad. That was why it had been sealed. Not because it could not open, but because it opened by making everything around it weaker. The deck bucked again. "Davin," Rhys said, already pulling the stabilizer cover shut. "Hold that unit in bypass. Do not let it free spin. You are leaving an open stabilizer in outer ring. I'm leaving you with an open stabilizer in outer ring. Try not to take it personally." "Where are you going?" The thing that has been legally dead for years is glowing. A pause. Gate 7. I would have preferred a rat in the conduit too. Rhys clipped the cover with 2 quick locks, grabbed his tool sling, and pushed into the corridor. People were coming out of their rented sleep bays and patch cargo cells, blinking under the red lights. Harbor 9 had been built as a transfer station, not a town. It had become one anyway. The poor and stranded lived where the station had room for them, which meant near the maintenance shafts, the old fuel loops, and the system's rich passengers never had to hear. Mara Quell came fast from the direction of the medical bay. Gray sleeves rolled to her elbows, a trauma kit strapped across her chest. "What failed?" "Gate 7 is trying to start." Her face went still. "That gate is sealed." "Yes, it is doing a very poor job respecting that. I have patients on open oxygen. Move them away from the outer bulkheads. If gravity drops, strap the beds to wall rails. If pressure dips, seal the ward before the market." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Before the market? The market has more exits and worse doors." She nodded once and was already turning. "Do not make me triage half this ring because you wanted to be clever. That is hurtful. I only want to be clever in small doses." He ran. Harbor 9, changed as he moved inward. Outer ring smelled of reheated food, old filters, machine oil, and people living too close together. The mid-corridor smelled cleaner, colder, more expensive. By the time Rhys reached the old access spine, the floor was steady again, but the walls hummed with a pressure he could feel behind his teeth. A security gate dropped across the corridor ahead. Rhys did not slow. He slapped his palm to the panel, waited for it to deny him, then jammed a thin bypass wedge under the casing and twisted. The gate rose 6 inches and stuck. "That is the spirit," he muttered. He slid under it on his back, dragging the tool sling after him. The gate slammed down behind his boots hard enough to shave a layer off one heel. The core lift was out. Of course it was. Rhys took the emergency ladder, moving down past levels where warning lights blinked over locked doors. Gate 7's corridor had not seen public traffic in years. Dust sat in the corners. Old hazard paint flaked from the walls. At the end, beyond the first sealed window, blue-white light pulsed like a heartbeat. A voice spoke through static before he touched the lock. "Do not cut that line. Female. Close in the system, but far in the signal." Commanding. Strained. Rhys looked at the dead camera above the door. "You're going to have to be more specific. I was planning to cut several. If you cut the phase feed, my ship loses the only bearing it has. And if I do not cut it, this station may peel open." The lock finally accepted his override. The door split with a reluctant groan. The auxiliary chamber had old manual placards bolted under every panel. Most were faded, but Rhys knew them by habit. "Do not engage phase without shield buffer. Do not maintain open state during civilian occupancy. Do not assume structural debt will remain local." Engineers had a talent for writing terrifying sentences as if they were washing instructions. Rhys had once joked that Gate 7 had more warnings than working parts. His old supervisor had answered that warnings were what engineers wrote after funerals. Since then, Rhys had stopped joking in this room. Alira could not know that. She saw only a locked door and a dying ship behind her. That made her dangerous in a way Rhys understood too well. Desperate, competent people could do more damage than fools. Inside the auxiliary control chamber, Gate 7 filled the far wall like a storm trapped behind glass. It was not open, not yet, but a narrow vertical seam of light trembled at its center, bright enough to paint the room in hard blue shadows. A figure stood in the main display, fragmented by interference. Tall, lean, silver-gold skin under a torn dark captain's coat, hair bound back in a practical knot. Her eyes were sharp, even through static. One hand braced against something Rhys could not see. The other moved over a control pad on her side of the connection. "Identify yourself," Rhys said. "Captain Alira Senn of the Lumen, Arkansas. Rhys Calder, Harbor 9 Field Systems." "You're using a band gate, Captain." "I'm using the only gate still close enough to reach." "No, you are shaking a station full of civilians. And you are about to close the last door on my crew." Rhys crossed the room and opened the manual cutoff box. The phase feed inside glowed white. That was wrong. Gate 7 should have been cold. It was drawing stability from the station shield, from old anchors in the hull, from any system connected enough to be robbed. Alira's image flickered. Behind her, Rhys saw a slanted corridor, smoke hanging in the air, shapes strapped along the walls. "Step away from the feed," she said. "You're not in a position to give orders on my station. My people are dying on my ship. Mine are standing under the ceiling you are trying to drop." Her jaw tightened. "I'm opening impulses. Each one is less than 3 seconds. I know what this gate does." "Then you know 3 seconds can still kill the wrong people." 4. The first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. Not guilt, calculation. A captain looking at a chart she hated. "I have hours of air left," she said. "Less for the lower decks. I have wounded. I have civilians. If the bearing drifts, we are gone." Rhys put his cutter against the glowing feed. "If Gate 7 spikes, outer ring loses pressure first. That is thousands of people who never volunteered for your rescue. Do you think mine volunteered to be erased from every safe route?" He almost asked what that meant. The gate answered first. A slit of light cracked wider. A burst of imagery punched through the chamber air. A ship corridor tilted at a bad angle. A crew member with a bloodless face holding a hatch shut with both arms. Rella Voss, though Rhys did not know her name yet, shouting over a shower of sparks. Beyond her, civilians strapped to cargo webbing, sharing masks, eyes wide in the red emergency glow. Not just crew, not just a captain refusing to lose her ship. The image collapsed. An alarm screamed through Harbor 9. Outer ring pressure warning. Market corridor. Gravity failure. Rhys did not cut the feed. He hit the local dampener instead, buying seconds, and ran for the door. Alira's voice followed him through the speakers. Where are you going? To keep the people you almost killed alive. I need the gate. Then help me keep the station standing long enough to use it. The market corridor had become a slow-motion disaster. Gravity had not vanished. It had turned confused. Crates floated chest-high. A cooking cart spun gently in the center of the corridor, scattering sealed meal packs. People clung to handrails and stall frames while a thin white mist streamed from a crack near the ceiling. Rhys launched himself from the wall rail, caught a drifting mechanic by the back of his vest, and clipped him to a pipe. Stay low, or high, whatever direction low decides to be. The mechanic blinked at him. What? Exactly. Mara had already sealed the medical ward. She was at the market entrance, pulling an older man away from the pressure leak. Door 3 is jammed. I see it. The safety will crush anyone under it if it drops. I see. That too. I enjoy having eyes. Alira's voice cut through his bead, clearer now that she had tied into the local channel. The gate pulse is cycling every 11 seconds. Door pressure will surge on the 9th. Rhys slid under a bent support, reached the door motor, and jammed his pry bar into the gear. You can read the surge from there? I can feel it in my hull. That sounds unhealthy. It is. The first surge hit. The jammed door shuddered down 2 inches. A woman screamed as her sleeve caught under a bent plate. Rhys shoved his shoulder under the door, teeth clenched. Next pulse in 6, Alira said. Mara, pull her free. I am trying. Try with more enthusiasm. Mara shot him a look, then yanked the sleeve loose with a field knife. Rhys kicked the pry bar deeper into the gear as the second pulse slammed through the corridor. The door dropped against the bar and stopped. Alira sent a burst of code through the emergency panel. The side latch opened. People spilled through into the safer corridor beyond. Rhys stayed until the last of them cleared. A cargo crate clipped his hip, spinning him into the wall hard enough to knock the breath out of him. Alira's voice sharpened. Calder, I am fine. Your heart rate says otherwise. My heart is dramatic. It gets that from my mother's side. He pushed off the wall and slapped a seal patch over the crack. The mist slowed, then stopped. The market corridor settled. Gravity returned in a lazy, downward wave. People dropped onto floors, benches, each other. Someone began to cry. Someone else began to laugh. Mara crouched beside the older man and gave him oxygen. Rhys looked through the nearest viewport. Far out beyond the station skin, one of the old anchor spines glowed dull orange. That was not fine. Coron Vale arrived with 20 armed security officers and a face like he had never once been surprised in his life. Gate 7 is under security authority, Coron said. Rhys leaned against the wall, still catching his breath. Nice to see you too. You will surrender core access. I would love to. Unfortunately, the core is overheated, the outer anchor is cooking, and if someone touches the wrong lever, we all get to find out how much air is in space. Coron's eyes moved from Rhys to the frightened crowd, then to the sealed market door. Outer ring sectors 7 through 9 will be locked down until the threat is contained. Mara stood up. There are patients in those sectors. They will remain where they are. With failing filters? Security has priorities. Rhys stepped forward. Those priorities breathe, right? Coron stare-hardened. You are a field technician, Calder. Not command. No, command usually is cleaner boots. Alira spoke through the local speaker before Coron could answer. If you cut the signal, the lumen arc drifts beyond recovery. Coron looked at the ceiling speaker as if it had insulted him personally. Unknown vessel, you have violated a prohibited transit gate. Your connection will be terminated. Rhys saw the flaw at once. Cutting the signal hard would snap the phase line and send one last uncontrolled surge through the station. He moved to the wall panel and laid his palm on the manual lockout. No one terminates anything until I bleed the phase feed. Karan raised a hand. 2 officers shifted toward him. Rhys smiled without warmth. You can arrest me now, or you can arrest the explosion in about 30 seconds. I recommend the one with fewer forms. Karan did not smile, but he lowered his hand. A security drone hovered behind him and projected a list of sealed sectors. Rhys saw Outer Ring Sector 6 on the list and felt his patience burn down a wire. Sector 6 still has people in it, Mara said. Karan did not look at her. They were instructed to remain indoors. They are indoors because the door's jammed. Then they are contained. Rhys took one step closer before Davin caught his sleeve. He forced himself to breathe. Punching Karan would be emotionally refreshing and technically useless. Alira's voice dropped into the channel, low enough that only Rhys heard. If that man closes your ring, he will close my ship next. Yes, Rhys said. Do all your officials speak like air is a privilege? No, some of them have better manners when they do it. The faint silence after that almost sounded like a laugh, but the signal broke before he could be sure. For now, Rhys opened a private channel to Alira. Captain Senn, yes. If we do this, you help me lower the station debt before I open anything again. My people cannot wait. Neither can mine. There was a long crackle of static. Then she said, tell me what you need. Rhys looked again at the glowing anchor spine outside the viewport. First, he said, we stop my home from tearing itself loose. Then we talk about yours. The old suit locker outside airlock 12 smelled like warm rubber and bad decisions. Rhys sealed the collar of his pressure suit while Davin checked the tether pack behind him. The airlock window showed Harbor 9's outer hull curving away into darkness, a city of plates, pipes, antennae, cargo blisters, and patched metal scars. Beyond it, Gate 7's unstable light bled through the station structure, not visible as a doorway from outside, but present as a blue shimmer along the anchor spines. Davin tugged the tether. This pack is older than my apprenticeship, so it has experience. It has corrosion, experience with texture. Davin did not laugh. Karan has 2 officers outside the core now. He is waiting for you to make one clean mistake. Then I will make several messy ones. Rhys. Rhys turned. Davin's usual sarcasm was gone. I mean it, Davin said. If you open that gate after his order, he will pin every broken plate on you. That assumes there are plates left to pin. Mara's voice came through the channel. Medical is running on half filtration. You have maybe an hour before the old patients start crashing. Alira added. Lumen Arc has less than 4 hours for the lower decks. Less if we keep the wounded warm. Rhys closed his eyes for a beat. Too many clocks. Harbor 9's filters. Lumen Arc's oxygen. Gate 7's debt. Karan's patience. None of them friendly. He opened his eyes. Then nobody waste my hour. The airlock cycled. Sound vanished. Rhys stepped out onto the hull of Harbor 9 with magnetic boots and a tether clipped to his waist. Stars burned hard and cold over the station's broken geometry. The old anchor spine was 60 yards away, a long rib of metal jutting from the outer hull. It glowed at the joints, heat blooming through insulation. Alira's signal was faint but steady. The pulse is sleeping now. I can keep it under threshold for 12 minutes. You can do 13. I said 12. I believe in personal growth. Believe faster. He crossed the hull, boots clanging through the suit bones. A thin stream of debris drifted past, scraps pulled by the warped field around Gate 7. Each piece moved slowly until it did not. One bolt snapped sideways and struck the hull with a bright flash. Rhys reached the first anchor clamp and opened the cover. The sensor inside was melted to slag. Clamp 1 is blind, he said. Davin cursed. If the sensor is gone, the automatic dampener will not take commands. I noticed when it looked like soup. Alira said, can you set it manually? Yes. In the same way a person can stop a door with his face. Is that a yes or a warning? Most of my work is both. He braced his boots, attached a hand crank, and began forcing the clamp into alignment. The metal resisted. Gate 7 pulsed in its sleep, and the hull rolled under him. His left boot lost contact. For one weightless second, Rhys hung sideways over the station skin, tether snapping tight against his ribs. A maintenance arm swung from the darkness and caught his tether before it tore loose. Rhys breathed out hard. "Captain, I have you," Alira said. The old maintenance arm groaned, its motors skipping. Rhys grabbed the hull rail and pulled himself back. That arm was decommissioned before I learned to shave. It still works. It has a very loose relationship with the word works. Would you like me to let go? No. I'm emotionally attached to living. He finished the crank. Clamp 1 locked. Clamp 2 took less time. Clamp 3 screamed as the tool bit in. The third sensor blew before he reached the final alignment. Sparks scattered into space like brief stars. Davin said, "We lost phase red on clamp 3. Rhys stared at the dead sensor. Without it, any later opening of Gate 7 would need a human hand on the phase lever. "Of course we did," he said. "Why should the day stop being charming?" Alira's voice softened by a fraction. "Can you still open a rescue channel?" "Yes." "At what risk?" "That depends how much you enjoy honest answers." "I have survived worse." Manual phase. Real-time correction. If the gate kicks, someone in the core has to hold it by hand. A silence. Then Alira said, "That someone would be you." Probably. I am leaving room for a miracle. It is a small room." He came back through the airlock sweating, sore, and already reaching for the next problem. The next problem was air. Mara met him in the corridor with a face that told him the medical bay had become worse while he was outside. Quran rerouted filtration from outer ring to the commercial deck. Rhys stopped. He what? Called it protective allocation. Of course he did. Murder sounds nicer in administrative language. Davin pulled up the station map on a cracked wall display. Red lines crawled across outer ring. If we do not restore flow, sectors 5 and 6 hit unsafe air in 20 minutes. Quran's voice came over the public channel. All non-essential personnel will remain in assigned sectors. Unauthorized movement will be treated as obstruction. Rhys looked at Mara. Did he just call breathing unauthorized? He did. Alira broke in. There are old service pipes under your Sector 5. They run close to the gate coolant loop. Rhys frowned. How do you know that? Your station sent me partial schematics during the first connection. Those schematics are 70 years old. So are your pipes. Point. Rhys, Davin, and 2 outer ring mechanics pried open a floor hatch and crawled into the low service crawl space. Heat pressed down. The old pipe labels had faded to ghosts. Rhys found the manual valve by touch, a cold ring half buried behind cable bundles. The pressure flipped before he could turn it. Pulse coming, Alira warned. 3 seconds. Rhys flattened. The pipe above him flexed with a sound like a giant clearing its throat. The mechanic behind him whispered a prayer. Rhys turned the valve on the downbeat of the pulse. Air moved. Not enough. Then more. Mara reported from medical. Flow restored. Rough, but enough. Rhys let his forehead touch the pipe for a second. I am thrilled rough is now our standard. The repaired flow did not make outer rings safe. It only kept it from dying quickly. Rhys crawled out into the corridor covered in dust and sweat, then spent 7 more minutes helping Mara move the weakest patients away from a bulkhead that clicked every time Gate 7 breathed. A man with shaking hands tried to carry 3 bags at once. Rhys took 2 without asking. Leave the cookware, Rhys said. It is all I own. Then I am honored to carry the fancy one. Move. The man stared at him, then gave a breathless laugh and stumbled toward the safer hall. Rhys hated that laugh. It was the sound of someone realizing he had to choose between memory and oxygen. Alira heard enough through his open channel to go quiet. When they had the last patient strapped in the medical bay, she said, Your outer ring is not a storage level. No, Rhys said. It is where people live when the brochures run out of pictures. My ship has a cargo bay like that now. Then you know why I am touchy. I know why you are angry. Not the same thing. No, she said, but close enough to start. Then Davin's channel burst open. Rhys, someone is at the phase sensor trunk. Rhys slid backward out of the crawl space. Who? Not ours. The chase started in a storage bay full of emergency blankets. The intruder wore a gray maintenance shell with no name tag and moved like someone who knew exactly which cameras were dead. He ripped a sensor blade from the phase trunk before Davin could reach him and bolted through a cargo passage. Rhys went after him. "Stop!" Rhys shouted, ducking under a low beam. "I've had a long day and very little patience for mysterious idiots." The intruder threw a crate behind him. Rhys jumped it, landed badly, and slammed shoulder first into a wall. He kept running. Alira, watching through the Gatelink station cameras, locked a hatch ahead. The intruder cut left into the water recycling tube. "He is heading to security-controlled space," Davin warned. "Of course he is." Rhys slid down a service ladder, boots hitting wet metal. The intruder was 20 feet ahead. Rhys gained enough to grab the back of the shell, but the man twisted free and slapped a security badge against the sealed hatch. The hatch opened just enough for him to slip through. Rhys hit it a second later. Locked. He punched the panel with the side of his fist. That was not satisfying. At his feet lay the broken sensor blade and a dropped access tab. Davin scanned the tab remotely. His voice went tight. "This traces to Karan's command tier." Rhys stared at the sealed hatch. "Can you prove he ordered it?" "No, not clean," Alira said. "The sensor is destroyed?" "Yes." "Then your manual phase problem just became certain." Rhys picked up the broken blade. "I was hoping for a day with fewer certainties." For the next stretch, Harbor 9 became a map of small disasters. A food heater shorted in the refugee galley because the power flow kept surging backward. A lift stopped between decks with 6 people inside until Rhys and Davin pried the roof open and hauled them up one by one. Mara sent a message every few minutes with numbers that made the station feel less like metal and more like a body losing blood. Alira stayed in the channel through all of it, sometimes silent, sometimes offering a timing call when the gate pulse shifted. Once, when Rhys crawled under a shaking lift and cursed in 3 languages, she asked if all Earth technicians were trained in profanity. "No," he said. "That was my advanced certification." "Does it help?" "Not mechanically. Emotionally?" "Immensely." The exchange was small, but after it, her silence felt less like distance and more like presence. They regrouped in the old auxiliary control room, where Gate 7 breathed blue light behind sealed glass. Rhys needed numbers. Real numbers. Hull, Massachusetts. Passenger count. Oxygen load. Heat load. Number of rescue pods. Number of bodies that needed to come through the gate alive. Alira gave him a number. Rhys did the math twice and looked up slowly. "No." Her face hardened in the display. "No what?" "No. That number does not match your oxygen decay. It is the official crew manifest." "I did not ask for official. I asked for true." Static crawled over her image. Davin looked between them and wisely said nothing. Rhys tapped the chart. "This oxygen curve is not 57 crew. It is more than double that." Alira's eyes did not move. Mara, listening for medical, said quietly, "Captain." Alira closed her hand around something off-screen. "There are civilians aboard." "How many?" "Enough. That is not a number. It is the number I can give without letting your system mark them for denial." Rhys felt his temper rise, not hot and wild, but cold and focused. "Your false number made my opening calculation wrong. Outer Ring nearly lost pressure, and your system would have left them outside the door if I gave their names too soon. Those people in Outer Ring are the same kind of people you're trying to save. Then you understand why I did not trust the door." The words hit harder than he wanted. He did understand. That was the problem. But understanding did not put air back into walls. Rhys leaned over the console. "If I do not have the truth, I cannot build a rescue plan. If I guess low, Harbor 9 pays. If I guess high, your people lose time we do not have." Alira held his stare through distortion. Finally, she said, "Then come here and see it yourself." Davin straightened. "That is insane." Rhys said, "It is not insane." Davin stared at him. Rhys added, "It is just extremely rude to survival." Karan's voice cut across the main channel. "Calder, you are ordered to remain on station." Rhys smiled faintly. "He makes it tempting," Alira said. "I can open a test slit for a service pod. 1 crossing. No return guarantee until we lock the bearing." Davin looked at Rhys. "If you cross, Karan will call it sabotage." If I do not cross, we are guessing with two populations on the table. Mara spoke softly. Bring back truth. I can work with ugly truth. I cannot work with unknown numbers. Rhys picked up his helmet. Preparing the pod took longer than courage and less time than common sense. Rhys had to strip a survey camera off the nose to make room for an old physical grapple. Davin loaded 2 spare oxygen cells, then added a third when Mara looked at him without speaking. Rhys packed seal patches, line anchors, a hand torch, a coil of marking cord, and 1 mechanical clock from a storage drawer because digital time had already proved too proud for the job. Mara pressed a small med kit into his chest. If you come back with a hole in you, use this before you make jokes. I could do both. I will sedate you. Noted. Davin held up the clock. Why this? Because if the field bends time signals, I want something dumb enough to keep ticking. Alira listened to the preparations with a captain's impatience barely held in place. Every minute you spend packing is a minute my lower decks lose heat. Every tool I forget is a minute I spend dying in an interesting way. Pack faster. See? We are already communicating beautifully. He had a small maintenance pod prepped in Bay 3, a dented little craft used for hull inspections, too old to impress anyone and too stubborn to die. It had physical grapple lines, a manual attitude wheel, and a seat that hated human spines. Davin stood at the launch panel. The gate slit will stay open for 4 seconds. Plenty. It is not plenty. It is plenty adjacent. Alira's voice came through the pod speaker. I will sink the slit from my side. Follow the blue bearing. Ignore the green flare. What happens if I follow the green flare? You miss my ship, and you do not want the and. The pod clamps released. Coron's security order flashed across the base screen. Launch denied. Davin shoved a pry tool into the panel and hard bypassed the clamp circuit. I'm going to lose my license. Rhys sealed his helmet. You always said you wanted a hobby. The pod fired. Gate 7 opened as a narrow wound of light. The pod hit the slit and the universe folded wrong. Rhys's stomach tried to resign. The stars became lines. The pod clock jumped forward, then back, then gave up and blinked. The manual wheel bucked under his hands. He found the blue bearing. The green flare blossomed to his left like a beautiful bad idea. Not today, he muttered. The pod slammed into something with enough force to throw him against the harness. For a second, all he heard was his own breathing. Then Alira's voice came from outside the pod, close and real. Calder, are you alive? Rhys opened one eye. I would like to file a complaint about your door. Welcome to the Lumen Arkansas. The ship did not look like an ark. It looked like a wounded animal that had stayed, standing out of pure refusal. Alira met him in the docking throat with a pressure patch on one sleeve and a sidearm at her hip. In person, she was taller than he expected, her movements controlled despite exhaustion. The air around her smelled of hot insulation and recycled breath. You are limping, she said. The seat and I had a disagreement. Did it win? It had home advantage. She almost smiled, then turned. This way. The first full pass through Lumen Arc took them through places Alira had clearly avoided describing because words made them smaller. A dining bay had been turned into a ward. A cargo hold had heat curtains hanging from ceiling hooks, each curtain sheltering a cluster of civilians. A navigation alcove was now a nursery for failing oxygen cells, with crew members rotating them through a charger that had been rebuilt from kitchen parts. Rhys saw a sailor give his own mask to an older civilian, then pretend not to be dizzy. He saw a crew member mark a door with green paint for safe passage, then add a second mark below it for people who could not read the first language. Lumen Arc was dying, but it was not chaotic. It was a ship being spent carefully. Alira watched him see it. You thought I was reckless, she said. I thought you were dangerous. And now I think you are dangerous with inventory control. That earned him the smallest breath of amusement. The corridors of Lumen Arc were marked with strips of light and hand-tied cords. Crew moved with quiet speed, passing oxygen cells, carrying tools, guiding civilians through narrow spaces. No panique. Not because things were safe, but because Alira had beaten panic into order. Relevos crawled out of an open engine panel, face streaked with soot. Captain, lower deck heat is falling again. I know. Report. Rella saw Rhys. This is the Earth technician. Yes. He looks smaller than the problem. Rhys nodded. Common reaction. Alira said, Can the main engine restart? Rella's expression answered before her mouth did. If we start it, the phase field grabs us harder. We drift out of gate reach. Rhys knelt by the panel and studied the readings. The phase field had soaked into the ship's frame. Every major beam carried a ghost of the gate's pull. A man approached with a bundle of paper sheets in protective film. Tavin ORL, thin, tired, and standing very straight despite it. Captain, Alira's face tightened. Tavin, not now. He should see. Tavin held the sheets toward Rhys. Names, marks, family groups, injuries, notes in different hands. Rhys took them carefully. What is this? The people who are not supposed to be on any ship, Tavin said. Ashline route stopped receiving supply calls. Then it stopped existing in the system. Captain Senn came anyway. Tavin did not look like a rebel or a criminal. He looked like a man who had become responsible for too many names because no one official wanted them. His sleeves were patched with 2 different fabrics, and one of his shoes had been repaired with wire. When he spoke, several civilians nearby turned their heads toward him, trusting his voice before they trusted the armed crew. Most of us worked the Ashline mineral platforms, he said. Then supply windows got shorter. Then medical shipments stopped. Then the route markers vanished. A place can be killed on a map before the people inside it run out of air. Alira's expression closed, but she did not stop him. We sent requests, Tavin said. Automated replies. Then no replies. Captain Senn came through a bad route because the safe routes would not accept our codes. Rhys looked at the handwritten list again. Some names had marked beside them. Needs heat, cannot walk, shares oxygen, missing family. Not cargo, not numbers. People reduced to ink because ink was harder for a system to reject than a broken code. He handed the list back more carefully than before. Alira looked away. Rhys read enough to understand why the oxygen math had been wrong. He handed the sheets back. How many alive? Tavin gave him the number. Rhys closed his eyes. The number was worse than his worst estimate. Alira said, Now you know why I did not trust your station's rules. Rhys looked at her. Now you know why I needed the truth. For a moment, the ship groaned around them, and neither spoke. Then the ceiling lights dimmed. Rella swore. Medbay corridor is slipping out of phase. Alira turned instantly. Move! They ran. The medbay corridor was not long. It should have taken 20 seconds to cross. Instead, it seemed to stretch whenever the ship groaned, the far hatch pulling away like an image in hot air. A nurse and 3 patients were trapped behind it. Their oxygen was local and falling. Rhys studied the corridor, then clipped a physical line to the wall. Digital maps are lying. Alira grabbed another line. I know this corridor. You knew this corridor. I know what it was. I know what pressure does when metal gets scared. We can split the difference. She looked at the line in his hand. You are suggesting we tie ourselves together and walk into a corridor that is failing reality. That is a dramatic phrasing, but yes. Do humans often attach themselves to trouble? Only when trouble knows the way. She stared at him for half a second, then took the line and clipped it to her belt. They moved by rhythm, not distance. 3 steps on the low hum. Stop on the high tremor. Pull the line when the floor shifted. Rhys marked the wall with paint bursts. Alira counted the old hatch ribs under her breath. A panel snapped loose. Alira shoved Rhys sideways. The panel clipped her shoulder and spun away. She hissed, but did not fall. Captain, move. They reached the hatch. Rhys forced the manual wheel while Alira braced the frame. The nurse pushed the patients through one by one, each clipped to the line. The corridor shrank on the return, hard and sudden, yanking the line tight enough to bruise Rhys's ribs. Alira hauled him the last few feet when his boot caught under a buckled plate. They tumbled into a stable corridor with the last patient between them. Rhys sat up, breathing hard. Blood darkened the sleeve at Alira's shoulder. Not much, but enough. You are hurt, he said. I noticed. That was an expensive way to win an argument. Her mouth twitched. Did I win? I am considering an appeal. He sealed the cut with a patch from his kit. His hands were gentle without making a show of it. Alira watched him with a wary kind of quiet. Rella's voice came through the ship channel. "Captain, we have a bigger problem." Rhys stood. At the engineering spine, Rella showed them the structural scan. The phase field had nested in the Lumen Ark's main frame. The ship was no longer simply trapped near Gate 7. It had become part of the instability. If they tried to drag the vessel through whole, the field would discharge into Harbor 9 and tear the station's weakest ring apart. Rhys looked at the scan, then at Alira. She understood before he said it. "No," she said. Rella's voice was small. "Captain, no." Rhys did not push. He had seen people hear the death of a place before. A ship was more than metal to a crew. It was a home, a record, a promise that movement was still possible. Alira pressed both hands to the edge of the console. "There must be another way." "There is," Rhys said, "but not to save the ship." Her eyes closed. He kept his voice steady. "We cut the Lumen Arc into sections small enough to pass through gate slits. Rescue pods, sealed cargo rooms, medbay shell if Rella can brace it. The main frame stays behind or becomes an anchor. The bridge. No. The engine. No. The aft spine." Rhys looked back at the scan. "The aft spine can hold the slits steady for the final transfer." Rella whispered, "It will rip the ship apart." Alira opened her eyes. "People first," she said, but the words cost her. She activated the ship-wide channel. "This is Captain Alira Senn. The Lumen Arc can no longer be brought home whole. We will convert the ship into rescue sections. Crew will guide civilians first. No one argues with the order unless they have found a way to breathe metal." A few crew members looked stricken. None disobeyed. The order did not move through the ship like a command. It moved like a loss. Crew members touched wall rails as they passed, not for balance this time, but because they were saying goodbye without having time for goodbye. One engineer took a strip of cloth from a hatchway and tied it around her wrist. A navigator removed a small star charm from the bridge console before the bridge lost power. Rella stood with both hands on the separation board, eyes bright and furious. Alira saw all of it. Rhys saw her seeing it. "Captain," Rella said quietly, "if we cut the bridge first, we lose command memory. Can you copy the NAV logs?" "Partial." "Then partial is what survives. And if the crew refuses to leave stations?" Alira looked down the corridor where her people were already moving civilians toward the first shell. "They will not. They know what a captain means when she says people first." Rhys asked, "Do you?" She turned to him. He regretted the question and did not take it back. Alira said, "I am learning the size of it." Rhys watched her stand in the ruin of her ship and make herself the blade that cut it. Respect settled in him, quiet and heavy. Cutting the ship into rescue sections required more than pressing separation commands. Rella had to show Rhys which bulkheads could take pressure alone and which would fold the moment they lost the neighboring frame. Rhys translated that into gate mass. Alira translated both into human order. Who moved first, who could wait, who needed heat, who would panic if separated from a familiar voice. They marked each section with paint, cord, and spoken instructions repeated 3 times. Digital labels might fail during the crossing. Paint would not. Rella hated the old method until Rhys handed her the marker and said old methods were just new methods that survived long enough to become smug. Alira moved among her crew without softness, but never without attention. She put one frightened young deckhand in charge of counting blankets because a task would keep his hands from shaking. She sent the strongest crew to carry civilians, not equipment. She ordered the bridge keepsakes left behind unless they fit in a pocket. Every order made the ship smaller. Back on Harbor 9, Karan Vale was done waiting. Rhys returned through a gate slit with Alira's full data loaded into his tool slate and a bruise across his ribs that made breathing a hobby he no longer enjoyed. Alira stayed aboard Lumen Arc to prepare the cuts with Rella. The crossing back hit harder than before because Gate 7's debt had grown. When Rhys stumbled out of the maintenance pod, Davin caught his arm. "You look terrible. I missed you too. Karan has security in the core." "Of course he does. And your access is suspended. That feels premature. I have not even finished breaking the rules." Mara came down the corridor, tired eyes searching his face. How many? Rhys gave her the true number. Mara did not flinch, but something in her shoulders lowered. I will need more beds. You will need more than beds. He projected Alira's data on the wall. Davin, Mara, and 3 station mechanics gathered around. The model showed Harbor 9, Gate 7, Lumen Arc, and the ugly arithmetic between them. Davin said, if we open enough slits to move that many sections, the shield will fail. Unless we give the shock somewhere to go, Rhys said. He highlighted a section of outer ring already evacuated after the first breach. No one spoke. Mara looked at him. People live there. They are out. Their things are not. I know. Do you? Rhys did not answer too fast. That would have been easier. I know enough to hate it. Davin shook his head. We blow the ring as a buffer. We do not blow it. We decouple it, let it absorb the phase shock, and lose the section. That is a prettier way to say blow it. Yes. Mara crossed her arms. They have tools there. Papers. Food. Filters. Everything they carried from wherever they escaped. Rhys looked at the highlighted ring. If we do not, the shock goes through the residential core. Mara's jaw tightened. Then we get them every minute we can to pull out what matters. We do not have many minutes. Then we spend all of them well. They began the evacuation before anyone was ready, because readiness had become a luxury word. Rhys went back in an outer ring with Mara at his side and a portable speaker tied to his belt. He did not tell people their homes were going to be sacrificed. Not at first. He told them the ring had to be cleared because another shock was coming. That was true. Then an old woman grabbed his sleeve and asked if she should bring her family records, and he could not lie around the shape of her eyes. Bring what you can carry in one hand, he said. Leave the rest. One hand you may need, the other to hold the rail. A young worker shouted that Harbor 9 always found a way to take from the people near the hull first. Rhys had no answer that would not sound like an excuse, so he gave the worker a coil of cable and told him to help pull his neighbors out. Anger moved better when it had a task. Mara caught Rhys between 2 doors. You cannot save their belongings by staring at them. I know. Then stop bleeding time. He nodded and kept moving, because she was right and because being right did not make either of them kinder. Before Rhys left the ruined section, a small girl pressed a dented metal cup into Mara's hands and asked if the cup would still be there after the shock. Mara looked at Rhys instead of answering. Rhys crouched, which made his knees complain inside the suit. I cannot promise the cup, he said. The girl's face tightened. He took a strip of bright repair tape from his kit and wrapped it around the handle. But I can make it easier to find if it survives. That is not the same. No, Rhys said. It is not. She accepted the cup back, handed it to an older neighbor, and let Mara lead her out. Rhys stood there a second too long, staring at the empty doorway of a room that had held more life than any luxury transit lounge he had ever fixed. Then Davin's voice snapped him back. Rhys, gate heat is climbing. Move. He moved. Alira listened over the private channel. Her voice was quiet. Outer ring pays for my ship. No, Rhys said. Outer ring pays if we pretend the shock disappears. We need your side to pay too. I know. Her answer came without hesitation, and that worried him more than argument. I will use the Lumen Arc's aft spine as the far anchor, she said. Rella protested in the background. Captain, that destroys our return frame. Alira's voice did not change. We do not have a return frame. We have people. Tavin's voice came next, unsteady. Captain, the civilians will not ask your crew to lose their home for us. They do not have to ask. Rhys listened, unable to see her face, and felt the shape of the choice settle between them. Not his sacrifice. Not hers. Theirs, and everyone would bleed a little from it. Karan made his move while they were still marking evacuation routes. Security sealed the main core. Rhys reached the entrance with Davin and found 2 officers in front of the door, weapons down but ready. Karan stood behind the glass, hands folded. Rhys Calder, your access is revoked. Gate 7 will be placed in permanent lock. Rhys looked through the glass at the phase lever beyond Karan's shoulder. If you lock it now, Lumen Arc dies. If I do not, Harbor 9 dies. You are skipping the part where we prevent that. You have already damaged station property, violated transit order, and conspired with an unauthorized captain carrying unregistered passengers. Rhys nodded. That sounds bad when you leave out the people. Coran's face remained calm. People survive systems. Systems do not survive people like you. There it was. Not a speech. Not a confession. Just the truth of him. Rhys opened a side channel. Davin, remember the old thermal crawl behind the core? Davin looked at him. The one filled with insulation dust and legal consequences? That one. Alira spoke from Lumen, Arkansas. I can send a false pulse through the gate. It will look like a surge. Security will move away from the lever. How false? False enough to scare them. Not false enough to kill anyone. That is my favorite flavor. Davin pried open a low panel behind a stack of coolant tanks. Rhys crawled in after him. The passage was barely wider than his shoulders and hot enough to make his skin prickle inside the suit liner. Dust coated his tongue. Behind them, Alira sent the pulse. Gate 7 roared. Not open. Not fully. But the core shook like something enormous had struck the wall from the other side. Coran's officers shouted. Through the service slit, Rhys saw them pull back from the lever. Rhys kicked the rear panel out and rolled into the core chamber. Coran turned, shocked for the first time that day. Coran's officers were not all cruel. That made the moment uglier. One young officer at the core door kept glancing toward the receiving bay, where the first rescued patients were still crying through oxygen masks. Another had his jaw clenched so tightly Rhys could see the muscle jump. They were following orders written to sound safe. The orders had been designed to make disobedience look like the dangerous choice. Rhys knew that trick. Bad systems loved clean language. He set the final manual line into the old phase socket and looked at the officers through the glass. When that door opens, you can either point weapons at the people carrying stretchers, or you can help keep the stretchers from tipping. No one answered. Coran did. Do not speak to my team. Rhys met the young officer's eyes anyway. Your team can't hear. That was all he had time for. The gate was warming under his hands. Rhys did not give him time to enjoy the new experience. He slammed a tool wedge into the lock rail and shoved the phase lever into manual. The system screamed with clipped warnings about access violation, manual hazard, and operator liability. Davin dropped beside the secondary panel and began hard-tying the backup line. We have a lever for maybe 10 minutes. Rhys grabbed the handles. They were already warm. Captain Senn, he said, are you ready to make a door out of what is left? Alira answered over a wave of static. No. Then, after one breath, open it anyway. The first rescue section came through like a stone thrown by a god. It burst from gate 7 in a shell of blue light, struck the receiving cradle, and skidded hard enough to tear grooves in the deck. Mara's team swarmed it before it stopped moving. The hatch opened. Cold air spilled out. People inside were alive. Gate 7 kicked. The phase lever burned through Rhys's gloves. Outer ring segment 12 decoupled. On the monitor, the evacuated section flexed as the shock hit it. Plates peeled away. Sleeping bunks, crates, cooking frames, hand-painted cloth walls, and 1,000 small signs of life scattered into the dark behind the shield boundary. Rhys forced himself to keep looking long enough to confirm the shock had not passed into the main residential core. Then the second section came. On Lumen Arc, Alira stood in the aft spine with Rella, one hand on a brace, one hand on the command strip. On Lumen Arc, the moments between launches grew shorter and more brutal. Alira moved through smoke and blue emergency light with Rella at her side, calling names from memory when the speakers failed. A crew member refused aboard because his station was not fully cleared. Alira caught him by the front of his suit and turned him toward a civilian struggling with a stretcher. Your station is that stretcher now, she said. He obeyed. Another crew member tried to carry a sealed box of navigation course. Rella reached for it, but Alira shook her head. The crew member understood and set the box down as if laying someone to rest. There was no space for proof, no space for pride, no space for the ship's past beyond what could fit in pockets and living hands. Alira took the small star charm from the bridge only when Rella pressed it into her palm. For the window, Rella said. Alira closed her fingers around it, then ordered the next section away. Around them, the ship was no longer a ship. It was a sequence of sealed pieces waiting to be cut away. Crew moved civilians into shells. Tavin helped strap the old and injured into webbing. Rella's hands flew over the separation controls. Section 2 away, Rella said. Send it, Alira said. The deck lurched as another piece of her ship left forever. She did not have time to mourn each cut. That would come later and drown her if she let it. Now she counted breaths, seals, heat, mass, the tiny delay in Gate 7's pull. Rhys's voice came through, rougher each time. Section 2 received. Still holding. You sound terrible, Alira said. You should see the lever. Is that humor? Not my best work. Then survive and improve. The first 3 sections taught them the rhythm. The 4th taught them the cost. It came through too hot. Not because Alira launched badly, but because the damaged sensor on Harbor 9's 3rd anchor forced Rhys to correct by feel. The rescue shell spun as it entered the receiving bay. Davin fired the cradle clamps late. The shell struck sideways and cracked an outer panel, not enough to breach, but enough to trap the hatch. Mara was there before Rhys could ask. Give me a bar. A Lumen Arc crew member jammed a crowbar into the seam. An outer ring. Mechanic added his shoulder. Rhys could not leave the lever, so he watched the hatch inch open while the next gate pulse climbed under his hands. Status, he snapped. Mara pulled a coughing woman through the gap. Alive. Angry. Good signs. Rhys laughed once through clenched teeth. Alira heard it. That was not your good laugh. I have categories now? Yes. Then this is my please make the universe stop stepping on my fingers laugh. Noted. The next section jammed halfway through the slit. Alira saw the problem on her side before Rhys could. A twisted cargo brace had not separated cleanly. If they pulled it back, the civilians inside lost their launch window. If they pushed, the brace could tear the shell open. Rella grabbed a cutter. Alira caught her arm. No time. Captain. Alira clipped herself to the aft rail and kicked across the failing compartment, using the movement of the ship against itself. She reached the brace, planted both boots, and fired the manual release with her own command seal. The brace blew free. The section vanished into Gate 7. The recoil threw Alira against the rail. Her injured shoulder flashed hot. She tasted blood where she had bitten her lip, but the suit's seal held. Alira, Rhys said. Not Captain. Not Senn. She took one breath. Still here. The words changed something between them, but neither had time to touch it. On Harbor 9, Karan tried one final lockout. Davin shouted. Remote command is cutting the backup line. Rhys could not move his hands from the lever. Can you block it? Not with tools. Mara, standing near the receiving bay with a stretcher team, looked up at the security balcony. Then do not use tools. The people in the bay had watched enough. Outer ring mechanics, Lumen R crew, civilians from the first sections, station medics, all of them moved. No grand signal. No speech. They simply filled the space between Karan's officers and the backup junction. One of the old mechanics slammed a manual breaker, closed with both hands. A Lumen Arc crew member held it there. Davin rerouted power through a maintenance board that sparked like a tiny storm. The lockout failed. Karan shouted orders that the room no longer obeyed. Rhys held the lever. Outer ring screamed metal into the shock. Lumen Arc lost its aft shell. The final rescue section remained. Alira stood alone now in the failing anchor spine. Rella had gone with the last medical group, because Alira had ordered it and Rella had obeyed with tears in her eyes. Tavin had gone too, carrying the written lists against his chest. The final section carried the last civilians and 4 wounded crew. It stuck at the launch cradle because the aft spine had warped. Alira saw the only solution. If she cut the aft spine early, the release would shove the section into Gate 7, but the anchor holding her escape route would fail. She might still reach the emergency pod clipped below the spine. Might. Rhys saw the same calculation in the data spike. Do not cut early, he said. I have no other push. The gate can hold one more half pulse. It cannot. You cannot. Captain. She smiled, though he could not see it. Now you remember my title. Alira. The sound of her name in his voice made the next breath harder. There are people in that section, she said. There's also you. I know. She fired the early cut. The final rescue section slammed forward and vanished into the gate slit. The aft spine tore loose around her. Alira launched herself toward the emergency pod as the corridor folded behind her. The pod hatch spun. She caught the rim with one hand. For one terrifying second she hung there, the wreck of Lumen Arc breaking apart around her in a field of blue fire. Then she pulled herself inside and hit release. On Harbor 9, Rhys held Gate 7 open past every red line on the board. The lever was too hot. His gloves smoked. Davin shouted something. Mara shouted something else. The final section appeared, struck the cradle, and held. A smaller pod shot through behind it, tumbling. Rhys slammed the lever down. Gate 7 shut. The world went silent. Then Harbor 9 shook one last time. A slow, deep shudder as the sacrifice section of Outer Ring took the final shock and broke away into darkness. The lever locked under Rhys's hands. The display stacked 3 cold notices. System access revoked, operator suspended, liability pending. Rhys let go and discovered his fingers did not want to uncurl. Davin had to pry his hands from the grips. Did she make it? Rhys asked. No one answered fast enough. Alira's pod was small enough that the receiving bay almost missed it. It came in tumbling behind the last section. No clean beacon, only a broken locator ping and a heat trail. A station mechanic fired a grapple too early and missed. Another cursed and fired a second line that caught the pod's rear bracket. The impact spun it into the safety net hard enough to tear 2 mesh anchors loose. For 3 seconds, the pod hung silent. Rhys heard nothing but the pulse in his own ears. Then the hatch cracked open from inside. Alira pushed it up with her uninjured arm and looked out at a dozen strangers staring at her. Did the last section arrive? She asked. Mara, who was already climbing onto the net with a med kit, stared at her. You are ridiculous. That is not an answer. Yes, Mara said. It arrived. Alira closed her eyes just once. Good. Then Mara's voice came from the receiving bay. Emergency pod is intact. She is alive. Rhys sat down on the core floor because standing had become an optional feature. Good, he said. Davin knelt beside him. You look awful. Rhys closed his eyes. You keep saying the sweetest things. The minutes after the final shutdown were stranger than the disaster itself. People kept bracing for another shock. Tools hovered over panels. Medics paused with bandages in hand. A child began to ask a question and was hushed by an adult who was also waiting for the station to answer. Harbor 9 answered with ordinary, ugly noises. Pumps restarting, fans catching, metal cooling, someone dropping a tray in a medical bay. The ordinary sounds nearly broke Rhys. Davin pretended not to notice. He sat beside him on the core floor and pressed a coolant wrap more firmly around Rhys's hands. You held it 4 seconds past limit. Do not tell me that. I'm telling you because if you ever say I overreacted about manual phase, I will replay the log at your funeral. That is a very specific friendship. It is the one you earned. The people from Lumen. Arc did not arrive in a triumph. They arrived in a cold light, torn blankets, alarms, and the smell of overheated metal. Hatches opened one by one. Mara's teams pulled people out and sorted them by breath, blood pressure, shock, and whether they could stand without help. She had no time for ceremony. She turned a cargo bay into a ward, then a storage hall into another ward, then used a row of food crates as examination tables. Tavin ORL sat on the floor with a marker, writing names on strips of tape and pressing them onto sleeves. The system rejected many of the rescued with clipped notices about invalid transit status, no route record, and no docking claim. Tavin wrote their names anyway. Alira came out of the emergency pod with one arm held tight against her side, and her captain's coat burned at the hem. She took 2 steps, found her crew, and became steady again because they needed her to be. Rella saw her and made a sound that was almost a sob. Alira pulled her close with her good arm, held her for one breath, then released her. How many? Alira asked. Rella wiped her face. We are counting. Then count moving. Help Mara. The first time Rhys stepped near the families from Outer Ring after the shock, The room quieted in a way no alarm had ever managed. He still wore burned gloves. They still wore the look of people who had obeyed him and lost nearly everything they owned. A woman with filter cloth wrapped around her hair said, "Was there no other section?" Rhys wanted to say no. He wanted to show her the math, the gate debt, the anchor maps, the mass curves that proved he had chosen the smallest disaster. But she had not asked for math. She had asked for the piece of home that was gone. "No section that saved the station," he said. "That does not give me back my room." "No, you understand that." Rhys looked at the floor. "I'm starting to." Alira stood several steps behind him, close enough to support, far enough not to protect him from the answer. The woman looked past Rhys to her. "And you lost your ship?" Alira nodded. "Yes." "Does that make it fair?" "No," Alira said. "It only means the cost was not yours alone." The woman held Alira's gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the bundle in her lap. It was not forgiveness. It was not hatred either. It was a place where a future answer might someday fit. Rhys watched from the core entrance, hands wrapped in cooling gel, shoulders heavy with exhaustion. He saw Alira direct stretcher traffic, assign crew to oxygen lines, put a frightened civilian beside Tavin because the man knew every name. She had no ship. She still commanded. Some of the outer ring residents came back to the edge of the sealed damage zone, while the rescue bay was still full of steam and shouting. They stood behind a temporary rail and looked at the place where their rooms had been. No one had to explain what was missing. A kettle, a toolbox, a blanket with a family pattern, a wall covered in chalk marks that tracked how tall someone's children had grown. Small things, which meant whole lives when a person owned little. One man Rhys had dragged out earlier saw him and turned away. Rhys accepted that. Gratitude was not owed for a wound, even if the wound had kept death out. Alira saw the exchange. She did not offer comfort. Instead, she walked to a group of her crew and ordered them to help the outer ring families search the safe debris for anything that could be recovered. It was not enough. It was something. Rhys watched her make that choice, and it mattered more than any apology she could have offered. Karan arrived with security at his back. He took in the broken receiving bay, the injured, the unregistered survivors, the station crew ignoring him, and the status board showing outer ring damage. "Harbor 9 will be placed under emergency closure," he said. "All unauthorized arrivals will be separated for review. Rhys Calder is to be removed from core systems immediately." No one moved at first. Then Rhys heard it. A wrong vibration under the floor. Small, ugly, familiar. He looked at the nearest wall gauge. The needle trembled out of rhythm. Davin saw his face change. What? Secondary anchor did not settle. Karan stepped closer. "You are finished touching this station." Rhys held up his gel-wrapped hands. "I would love that. Truly. But your station is currently trying to unscrew its own hip." "Enough." Rhys nodded toward the gauge. "Anchor 6 is slipping. If it goes, your emergency closure gets very drafty." Davin checked the board and went pale. He is right. Karan's officers hesitated. Mara, without looking up from a patient, said, "If you arrest the person who can fix that, please do it after I am done needing air." A few tired laughs moved through the bay. Not happy laughs. Human laughs. Alien laughs. The thin sound people made when the alternative was falling apart. Karan did not step aside. Alira did. She walked to Rhys, took a tool pack from a stunned security officer, and held it out. "Can you fix it?" Rhys looked at his bandaged hands. "Not alone. I did not ask that." He took the pack. Alira turned to Rella. "Crew able to stand with me?" "Davin, show us where to carry." Karan's authority did not vanish. Nothing so clean happened, but it thinned as people moved around it. Luminar crew hauled oxygen lines. Outer ring mechanics dragged braces from storage. Tavin organized civilians to clear paths and match families. Mara sent recovering patients who could walk to fold blankets and boil water. Harbor 9 did not become safe. It became busy staying alive. The work after the anchor repair spread in rough circles. No one had enough official equipment, so they made ugly temporary systems out of what survived. A cargo sled became a rolling oxygen rack. A broken food printer became a heater. Sections of the old market frames were stripped, straightened, and bolted into bunk supports. Someone painted arrows on the floor because the station signs had failed and the rescued civilians kept walking into sealed corridors. Alira proved better at this than any station officer. She did not ask people to calm down. She gave them tasks small enough to do while frightened. Carry these blankets. Count these filters. Stand by that door and call if the light turns red. Find anyone who speaks the Ashline dialect and bring them to Tavin. Her command did not make the grief vanish, but it turned grief into motion. Rhys watched her from under an open pump housing and thought that losing a ship had not made her less a captain. It had only changed what she was captain of. Rhys stood at anchor 6 with Alira beside him while Davin monitored the gauge. The repair was ugly. 2 manual clamps, 1 borrowed brace from a cargo sled, and a piece of hull plating cut from a damaged market stall. It would not pass inspection. It would hold until morning. He also knew the repair was a lie with bolts in it. The brace would hold for a day, maybe 2, and then someone would have to bring real parts from a depot that might refuse to ship to a damaged station. Harbor 9 had survived the gate, but survival had invoices, schedules, and shortages waiting behind it. That made Alira's idea of a response team less like hope and more like necessary work. For Rhys, that was almost comforting. A crisis with no clean ending still became a list of jobs. Jobs could be shared. Jobs could be started before anyone felt ready, even in damaged, borrowed station rooms. Alira watched his hands shake slightly as he tightened the last bolt. You should be resting. So should you. I lost my ship. I am avoiding sitting still. I broke part of my station. Same hobby. She looked through the torn viewport at the dark gap where Outer Ring Segment 12 had been. Work lights floated there now, small and brave. People moved across temporary bridges with tools and cables. Those people lost their homes because of our choice, she said. Yes, you will not soften it. I do not know how to soften a thing like that without lying. She was quiet. Then she said, Lumen Arc was my home. I know. No, she said, but not sharply. You know the word. You do not know the rooms. Rhys tightened the bolt another quarter turn, though it did not need it. Tell me one. Alira looked at him. He shrugged. Only if you want. She looked back at the work lights. There was a narrow window behind the bridge where the stars bent when we crossed warm routes. Rella hated it because the seal always fogged. I liked it because for 3 breaths after a jump, every star looked close enough to touch. Rhys said nothing for a while. Then he said, Outer Ring had a noodle stall under Pipe 6. Terrible noodles. Best steam heat in the whole station. People sat near it even if they hated the food. Alira's mouth softened. Did you hate the food? With commitment. And still ate there? It was warm. The station groaned, but the anchor held. Later, when the pump finally steadied, Rhys found the taped metal cup on a sorting table. The handle was bent, but the bright strip had made it visible among broken panels. He picked it up, checked that the rim was safe, and handed it to Mara. Found one ghost, he said. Mara looked at the tape and understood. I will get it back to her. It will not fix anything. No, Mara said, but it will be one thing the gate did not take. That was how the night began to change for Rhys. Not through forgiveness, not through victory, but through small returned things. A cup, a name, a breathing patient, a hatch that held. Enough small things could not erase the cost. They could keep the cost from becoming the only truth left. Alira looked at his burned gloves, then at his face. There are things neither of us can repair. Rhys swallowed. Yes. So we start with what still takes bolts. He laughed once, softly, because if he did not, something in his chest might crack. That is a very Earth thing to say, he said. I learned from a troublesome technician. Poor influence. Useful one. In the next hours, Harbor 9 became less a station than a promise being rebuilt in public. Mara's cargo bay ward filled and emptied and filled again. Tavin's handwritten names covered 3 wall panels when the official registry kept refusing them. Rella rigged Lumen Arc power cells into backup heaters for the sick. Davin found old station blankets sealed behind a customs wall and decided the lock had always looked temporary. Karan sent 3 more closure orders. Each one found fewer people willing to stop working long enough to obey. After the third order, Karan tried a different weapon. He stopped shouting. He began recording. A security drone lifted above the bay, its lens moving from the broken ring display to the injured survivors, then to Rhys at the restricted systems. Karan wanted a clean image. A human technician with burned hands, an unauthorized alien captain, unregistered passengers. Ruined station property. He wanted the story to fit in a file. Tavin saw the drone and stepped into its path with his handwritten list. The drone shifted. Tavin shifted with it. Karan's voice came cold through the bay. Move. Tavin did not raise his voice. These are names. They are evidence. Their names first. A dozen rescued civilians moved behind him. Then 2 station mechanics. Then one of Mara's nurses, still wearing stained gloves. The drone could no longer film a simple crime. It filmed a crowd of people who had been carried through fire and were now refusing to become paperwork. Rhys did not make a speech. Alira did not broadcast proof. No grand court appeared to declare what had been right. There was only Harbor 9, damaged and breathing, held together by people who had been told they were not valid enough to save. When Gate 7 finally cooled into dark sleep, Rhys stood with Alira in a temporary observation bay made from a cleared storage room. The viewport had a crack sealed under transparent resin. Beyond it, Outer Ring's missing section showed as a dark bite in the station curve. Work crews moved around it, sparks from welding torches drifting like fireflies. Rhys's hands were bandaged. Alira's shoulder was sealed under a clean wrap. Neither of them looked heroic. They looked used, tired, and still standing. Will they let you keep working? Alira asked. Officially? No. Unofficially? He nodded toward a passing mechanic who had just waved him over a problem with a pump. Apparently, I'm haunting the station. Good. It needs a ghost with tools. What about you? She watched Rella, guiding a group of former Lumen Arc crew across a temporary bridge. I have no ship. No, I have a crew. Yes, I have people who know dead routes, and a gate that everyone is terrified to open. It should be terrifying, she said. That is not the same as useless. Rhys looked at her. You want to build a response team. I want no captain to be forced to choose between killing a station and abandoning a ship, because no one prepared for the ugly version of rescue. That is a long department name. I will shorten it. You will need station. Access. You lost yours. Perhaps between us we have one illegal permission. He smiled. It hurt his cracked lip, but he did it anyway. They stood in the hum of damaged systems and distant voices. No clean victory waited for them. Karan still had power. Outer Ring still had holes. The people from Ashline routes still needed beds, names, and a future the system would not hand them easily. But the bay behind them was warm. The ward had air. The last people from Lumen Arc were alive. Alira tilted her head, studying the missing piece of Outer Ring. Do people from Earth always open doors by breaking part of their own house? Rhys looked at the dark curve of the station, then at the crew's welding light back into it. Usually we try the handle first, he said. Today the handle was a little big. For the first time since Gate 7 had woken, Alira laughed without pain hiding inside it. Rhys did not reach for her hand like a man claiming a reward. He simply held his bandaged hand near hers on the rail, close enough to ask, not take. After a moment, Alira set her hand beside his. Outside, Harbor 9 held. Inside, people kept working. And between a forbidden gate and a broken ring, 2 survivors stayed where the damage was, ready to fix what still could be fixed. If this story stayed with you, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it lets me keep bringing you more human and alien stories like this one. And if you know someone who loves science fiction, deep space rescue, and stories about what humans are willing to risk for strangers, please share this with them. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you again in the next story.